Hello and welcome. I'm glad you're here. Whether you've come to this video seeking rest, contemplation, or simply a gentle voice to accompany you through the quiet hours, you've found a safe space to let go of the day's concerns. Tonight I'll share with you a collection of stories, some ancient, some modern, all woven together by threads of meaning that speak to the deeper parts of our human experience. These are tales of choice and consequence, of compassion and understanding, of the invisible connections that bind us all together. You don't need to follow every word. Let my voice become like water flowing over smooth stones, present but undemanding. If you drift away, that's exactly as it should be. These stories will be here, a gentle current carrying you toward rest. Let's begin our journey together. On a rocky coastline where the North Atlantic meets jagged cliffs worn smooth by 10,000 years of waves, there stood a lighthouse. Not a grand lighthouse of the sort you might imagine from postcards. No gleaming white tower with cheerful red stripes, but a weathered structure of gray stone, stubborn and ancient, built by hands long forgotten. The lighthouse keeper's name was Thomas Maritime, though everyone in the small village 3 miles inland simply called him Maritime, as if his surname had absorbed his entire identity. And perhaps it had. Maritime had tended the light for 23 years, ever since the previous keeper, old Edmund Cross, had simply walked into the sea one winter morning and never returned. Maritime was 57 years old. He had a face carved by wind and salt spray, with deep lines around his eyes, the kind of lines that come from squinting at horizons, searching for ships in distress. His hair had gone the color of steel wool, and his hands bore the permanent scars of rope burn and 100 small accidents that come from a life lived in service to others' safety. He lived alone in the keeper's cottage, attached to the lighthouse base. 3 rooms, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove that heated the entire dwelling, a bedroom with a narrow bed and a window that looked out at the endless sea, and a sitting room filled with books. Maritime read constantly during the long hours between his duties. Philosophy, mostly. Marcus Aurelius, Spinoza. Lately, he'd been working through Kierkegaard, though the Danish philosopher's darkness sometimes felt too close to the darkness of the sea. On the evening our story properly begins, Maritime was reading in his sitting room when the barometric pressure began to drop. He felt at first in his bones a deep ache in his left knee where he'd broken it in a fall 15 years earlier. Then he noticed his oil lamp's flame beginning to flutter despite the absence of any draft. He stepped outside. The sky had taken on a peculiar quality, a kind of yellowish green that Maritime had learned to dread. The wind had fallen to an eerie calm, and the sea, normally a chaos of gray and white, had gone smooth as hammered pewter. But Maritime could see the darkness on the horizon, a wall of black clouds advancing like an army. He had perhaps 2 hours before it hit. Maritime moved with practiced efficiency. He checked the lamp fuel full. He secured the shutters on the cottage windows. He brought in extra firewood and filled every pot and bucket with fresh water from the well. He made himself a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and salted fish, eating without tasting, his mind already tracking through the procedures he would need to follow. The storm arrived with the violence of a god's wrath. First came the wind, howling around the lighthouse with a sound like the screaming of 1,000 souls. Then the rain, not falling but flying horizontally, each drop a tiny bullet of ice-cold water. The waves began to build, growing from 10 feet to 20, 20 to 30. Great mountains of dark water that crashed against the rocks below with such force that Maritime could feel the vibrations through the stone floor of the lighthouse. He climbed the spiral stairs to the lamp room 147 steps, worn smooth in their centers by generations of keepers' boots. The lamp needed constant attention in storms like this. The wind could shatter the glass panels if they weren't properly secured. The fuel flow had to be monitored. The light had to keep turning, sweeping its beam across the murderous sea, the only thing standing between passing ships and oblivion. Maritime settled into the keeper's chair beside the lamp, a wooden seat polished by decades of vigil. Through the windows he could see nothing but darkness and rain, the world reduced to a chaos of water and wind. But the lamp turned steady and bright, its beam cutting through the storm with mechanical precision. This was his purpose. This was what he did. At 2:47 a.m. the radio crackled to life. Maritime had installed the marine radio only 5 years earlier, after a particularly bad season when 3 ships had gone down within sight of the coast. The authorities had insisted. Maritime had resisted. He preferred his solitude, but eventually conceded. Now he was grateful. The voice that came through was young, male, and trying hard not to sound terrified.
This is the merchant vessel Prosperity. We are taking on water. Engine failure. Approximately half a mile south of Cragmore Point. We have 6 souls aboard. Request immediate assistance. Over.
Cragmore Point. Maritime's blood went cold. Cragmore Point was a knife edge of rocks that extended nearly a quarter mile from the coast. Submerged at high tide, a ship killer that had claimed dozens of vessels over the centuries. In this storm and the dark, the Prosperity was sailing blind into a death trap. Maritime grabbed the radio handset. Prosperity, this is Cragmore Lighthouse. I copy your distress. You need to come about immediately. Bearing 045 degrees. The rocks extend south from your current position. Do you understand? Come about to 045, over. Static. Then?
Lighthouse, our rudder is damaged. We have minimal steering. We are attempting, but we can't make that turn. Over.
Maritime's mind raced. The Coast Guard station was 30 miles south. In this weather, their cutter couldn't possibly reach the Prosperity in time. There was a lifeboat in the village, but by the time they could launch it, if they could launch it at all in these seas, the merchant vessel would already be on the rocks. 6 people, 6 souls, as the voice had said. Maritime knew these waters better than anyone living. He had swum in them as a boy before taking up the lighthouse. He knew every current, every rock, every shifting sandbar. There was one possible path, a narrow channel between the worst of the rocks, barely deep enough for a small boat, even at high tide, and certainly not deep enough for a merchant vessel. But it was something. It was a chance. Prosperity, listen carefully, Maritime said into the radio. I'm going to guide you through. You need to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. I need you to maintain your current heading for exactly 3 minutes, then come about to 060 degrees. Do you understand? Over.
Understood. 3 minutes, then 060. Over.
Maritime checked his watch. His hands were shaking slightly, and he gripped the edge of the table to steady them. Everything depended on timing. If the Prosperity turned too soon, they would hit the outer rocks. Too late, and they would miss the channel and wreck on the inner shelf. He watched the second hand sweep around the face of his watch. The storm raged. The lamp turned. Time seemed to thicken.
Prosperity, come about now. 060 degrees. Over.
Coming about 060. Over. As Maritime guided the Prosperity through the treacherous waters, word by word, degree by degree, another sound cut through the storm. At first he thought it was the wind, but no, it was the radio again, a different frequency, a different voice.
Mayday, Mayday, this is the fishing vessel Anna Marie. We are sinking. We have struck something. 3 persons aboard. Position approximately 2 miles northwest of Thornback Rock. Mayday, Mayday.
Maritime felt the world tilt. Thornback Rock was in the opposite direction from Cragmore Point. The Anna Marie was a local boat. He recognized a call sign. Billy Thornton's boat. Billy would have his 2 sons with him, teenagers, good boys who helped their father pull crab pots. Maritime looked at his radio, at his watch, at the darkness beyond the lamp room windows. The Prosperity needed constant guidance. One wrong instruction, one moment of inattention, and 6 people would die on the rocks. But the Anna Marie was sinking, right now, and Maritime knew exactly where Thornback Rock was, knew the currents there, knew that if the boat had struck the rock and was taking on water, Billy and his boys had perhaps 10 minutes before the sea claimed them. He could save one vessel or the other, not both. This is the mathematics of catastrophe, the arithmetic of impossible choice. 6 strangers on a merchant vessel, or 3 neighbors, a father and his sons. Who deserves to live? Who has more right to rescue? Is it numbers that matter, or proximity, or familiarity? Maritime's hand hovered over the radio dial. His mind moved through the calculations with a speed born of desperation. If he switched to help the Anna Marie, could he get back to the Prosperity in time? No. The merchant vessel would be through the critical passage in the next 4 minutes. Without his guidance, they would almost certainly wreck. But Billy's boys, 16 and 14 years old, their whole lives ahead of them. What Maritime did in that moment would define the rest of his life. He kept the radio on the Prosperity's frequency. Prosperity, you're doing well. Maintain 060 for another minute. Then we'll need a slight correction. Over. He heard his own voice, steady and professional, as if it belonged to someone else. Inside, he was screaming. He guided the Prosperity through the channel, calling out each adjustment with precision. Come to 065. Good. Steady now. You're through the worst of it. Maintain current heading. In 2 miles, you'll have open water.
Understood, Lighthouse. We owe you our lives over.
Maritime didn't respond. He was already switching frequencies, his hands fumbling with the dial. Anna Marie, this is Cragmore Lighthouse. What is your status? Over. Silence. Just the hiss and crackle of the storm. Anna Marie, do you copy? This is Cragmore Lighthouse. Over. Nothing. Maritime tried for 20 minutes, calling again and again into the void. Finally, he radioed the Coast Guard, giving them the last known position of the fishing vessel. But he already knew. In his bones, in his soul, he already knew. The Coast Guard found the wreckage of the Anna Marie at dawn. The boat had capsized and sunk. They recovered 2 bodies, Billy Thornton and his younger son, Marcus. The older boy, James, was never found. The Prosperity made port safely. All 6 crew members survived. Their families sent letters to Maritime, thanking him. One sent a bottle of expensive whiskey. Another sent a check for $500. Maritime left them all unopened on his kitchen table. He continued his duties. He tended the lamp. He monitored the radio. He read his philosophy books, though now the words seemed to slip away from him like water through cupped hands. Kant wrote about the categorical imperative, about moral duties that must be followed regardless of consequences. But what duty had Maritime followed? The duty to save the many over the few? Or had he simply frozen, paralyzed by choice, and defaulted to the easier path, the strangers who couldn't look him in the eye afterward? The utilitarian calculus said he'd made the right choice. 6 lives saved versus 3 lost. The mathematics was clear. But mathematics doesn't weep. Mathematics doesn't wake at 3 in the morning, hearing a 14-year-old boy's voice calling for his father as the sea rushes into his lungs. Was it wrong to try to save the Anna Marie, knowing it would likely doom the Prosperity? Or was it wrong not to try? Is there such a thing as a right choice when every option leads to death? The village knew what had happened. In small coastal communities, everything is known. Maritime could feel their eyes on him when he made his monthly trip for supplies. Some looked at him with sympathy, others with something harder to name. Billy Thornton's wife, Sarah, was the one who finally approached him. It was 3 months after the storm. Maritime was loading provisions into his cart when he saw her walking toward him across the cobblestones. He wanted to run. He wanted to sink into the earth. She stopped in front of him. She was a small woman, made smaller by grief, her face hollow and aged. They stood in silence for a long moment. "You saved 6 people that night," she finally said. Maritime couldn't speak. His throat had closed. "I wanted you to know," she continued, "that I don't blame you. Billy wouldn't have blamed you either. He knew the sea. He knew the risks." "I should have," Maritime began, but she raised a hand. "There's nothing you should have done differently," she said. You can't split yourself in two. You can't be in two places at once. You made a choice in an impossible situation, and 6 people are alive because of it. My boys. My Billy. Her voice broke. They're gone, but that's not your fault. That's the sea's fault. That's the storm's fault. Not yours. She reached out and touched his arm, just briefly, then walked away. Maritime stood in the village square, surrounded by the ordinary bustle of ordinary life, and felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness. He would never forgive himself. Not relief. The weight of what happened would never leave him. But perhaps something like acceptance. A recognition that he was human, fallible, limited, forced to make choices with incomplete information and insufficient time. That night, back in his lighthouse, Maritime opened one of the letters from the Prosperity's crew. It was from a young man named Peter Chun, who had been making his first voyage as a merchant sailor. I am writing to you from my parents' home, the letter read. I have decided to leave the sea and pursue a different path. That night in the storm changed me. It made me realize how precious and fragile life is. I am enrolling in medical school. I want to spend my life saving people the way you saved us. Thank you for giving me the chance to do that. Maritime read the letter 3 times. Then he walked to his bookshelf and pulled down a volume of Kierkegaard. He found the passage he was looking for. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. We make our choices in darkness with incomplete knowledge racing against time. We can only judge those choices later, when we can see the consequences rippling outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. But we have to make the choices anyway, in the moment, doing the best we can with what we know. Maritime couldn't have known that Peter Chun would become a doctor, that he would go on to save hundreds of lives over a long career in emergency medicine. He couldn't have known that another survivor from the Prosperity, a woman named Elena Vasquez, would adopt 2 children who would otherwise have grown up in an orphanage. He couldn't have known the countless ways that those 6 lives would branch and multiply, touching other lives, creating effects that would echo through generations. But he also couldn't forget that James Thornton would never grow up, never fall in love, never have children of his own, that Billy Thornton's knowledge of the sea accumulated over 50 years had died with him, that Marcus, who had loved to paint, had left behind half-finished canvases that would never be completed. Both things were true, the saving and the loss, the choice and its consequences, the weight of it all. Maritime continued as lighthouse keeper for another 12 years. He saved other ships, other lives. He became a kind of legend on that stretch of coast, the keeper who never slept, who was always listening, always watching. He never married. He never left the lighthouse for more than a day at a time. Some said he was doing penance. Others said he was just doing his job. Perhaps both were true. On his 70th birthday, Maritime received a visitor, a young man in his 20s, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of the sea on a clear day. I'm James Thornton, the young man said. Maritime felt his heart stop. I'm sorry, The young man said quickly, "I should have explained. I'm named after my uncle. My father was Marcus Thornton. He died when I was not yet born, in a storm, on the Anna Marie." Maritime couldn't speak. "My mother told me about you," James continued. "She told me about that night. She wanted me to come here to meet you. She said you've been punishing yourself for 12 years, and it needed to stop." "Your father," Maritime began. "My father died at sea," James said. "It's what happens. It's what happened to his father before him, and his father before that. It's the price the sea demands. But my mother, Sarah Thornton, she's still alive. She remarried. She has grandchildren now. Me and my cousins. Life goes on, Mr. Maritime. Life goes on." "I made a choice," Maritime said, and his voice sounded ancient even to himself. "I chose to save strangers instead of your family." "You chose to save 6 people instead of 3, James replied. "That's what my mother said. And she said something else. She said that if you had chosen differently, if you tried to save the Anna Marie and let the Prosperity wreck, you'd be torturing yourself over those 6 deaths instead. Either way, you'd be here in this lighthouse alone, carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry." Maritime looked at this young man, named after an uncle he'd never met, bearing a message from a woman who had lost everything. How can she not hate me?" he asked. "She does hate someone," James said. "She hates the storm. She hates the sea sometimes, but she doesn't hate you. She pities you. She says you're a good man who got caught in an impossible situation, and that you've been in prison ever since, a prison you built for yourself." You chose to do your duty," James interrupted. "You chose to save who you could save. That's all anyone can do." We leave Maritime there, in his lighthouse, facing this young man who carries his uncle's name and his grandmother's forgiveness. Did he accept it? Did he finally lay down the burden he'd carried for so long? Or did he continue his vigil, faithful to the light, faithful to the duty, forever marked by that night when the storm demanded a choice no person should have to make? The story doesn't answer that question because life doesn't answer that question. We are all, in our own ways, lighthouse keepers. We stand at our posts, doing the best we can with what we have, making impossible choices in insufficient time. We save who we can save, we mourn who we cannot. We live with the consequences. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's all we can do. To be present, to be faithful, to keep the light burning even when the darkness seems overwhelming. To forgive ourselves for being human. Let that thought settle over you now as we prepare to move to our next story. The image of a lighthouse standing firm against the storm, its light turning steadily, a beacon in the darkness. And inside a keeper, flawed and human, doing the best he can. Rest in that image for a moment. Let it comfort you.